Hello and welcome to another Make and Mingle tutorial video. Today we are going to be making beeswax wraps, which are an excellent option to use instead of plastic saran wrap to save foods and keep them fresh longer. And it is also a sustainable thing to use. So what we will be needing today will be beeswax, and you can use pellet beeswax like we have here, or you can use a block and a grater and you can shave off the amount that you're going to need. We are going to be using about 3 tablespoons of the beeswax. And then we will also be using pine resin. If I can make sure that's centered. Pine resin, and the pine resin will be used to help create a little bit more stickiness with the beeswax, that it will actually cling to itself if you fold it around, or cling to the outside of a jar or a bowl or anything like that. And you're going to need about 1.5 tablespoons, but probably slightly less than that. And then we will also be using jojoba oil. This is going to help make sure that beeswax and pine resin mixture will continue to keep a bit of flexibility. It will not become too rigid, so that it will be able to be used to shape and not crack apart or anything like that. Jojoba oil specifically has good antimicrobial properties, so it is the one that is the most recommended and most frequently used in these types of projects. Other things you're going to need, I have access to a stove. As you'll see, we're in a different spot than we have been for any of our previous programs. This is my home. You might hear my cat in the background screaming. Please excuse her. But we are going to have a stovetop handy close by if you're in the kitchen and you're working at your table, but you're close to your stovetop. That works well. I'm actually going to work right next to my stovetop so that I can keep the everything that I need at a nice, cool, warm temperature. And the reason we're working so close is we're going to use a jar placed directly into a saucepan of water as a double boiler. You can use an actual double boiler if you wish to, but we're going to use this method because the jar we can then use to leave our mixture in it, and we can reheat it because you can then apply more to your wraps later down the road to refresh those wraps to make them last longer. Once those wraps are done with, you can throw them out, and they are actually compostable because you're going to be making sure that you use 100% cotton fabric squares, and you can cut these at any size. This one is about 10.5 to 11 inches by 10.5, 11-ish inches in size, but you can do 9 by 9, which is what the smaller size that you might have in your kit might be. And there's all kinds of different sizes out there. I would recommend trying 2 different sizes, one a little bit larger, one a little bit smaller, to see what actually ends up being the most useful in your own kitchen. I also have a tongue depressor stick to use to stir, but you can use anything that would work for you to stir. Just remember that whatever you use to melt your mixture into, and whatever you use to stir it, and we're also going to use this brush to be able to apply it onto the fabric, all of those materials are going to be coated in wax. And so you might want to use something that either you're going to leave it in, which is why I'm using a jar for the mixture, or that if it's difficult to clean, it doesn't need to be perfectly clean, just because it might be a challenge. And the last thing we're going to need, well, there's 2 more things. We're going to need parchment paper, and you're also going to need a clothing iron. And that we're just going to use as a final touch to make sure that we know that the mixture has gotten into the whole of the fabric. But first, we're going to bring our water to a simmer. My water is starting to come to a simmer here. I'm going to turn it down just a little bit, place my jar in, and I am going to put my wax in and start melting that up. And you can add your pine resin right away, but I have found that it seems to work better to bring down the beeswax all the way to the melting point, because the resin will go from the powder or crystal form, and if you do have larger crystals, you can make those more powdered and it will melt a little bit more quickly and consistently, but it's also going to bind to itself no matter what and become kind of sticky sap, and then it will from there start to dissolve fully into the mixture. So if the wax is actually completely liquid, it helps to melt this and dissolve it and mix it in a lot faster. All right, and it is now mostly dissolved, so I am going to very slowly start adding pine resin in, just a small bit at a time, because as I said, it has a tendency of, I'll show you, so it did it right away. It immediately melted into a glob. So I am going to just a small bit at a time work the resin in, and you will find that it will melt in. You just have to be patient with it. All right, I have most of my pine resin melted into my beeswax. I decided to not use the whole amount. It looks like a fair bit more than when I had measured out all the kits. So I think I measured it just slightly off and went a little bit too much over. But now that it's all dissolved, I am going to add the jojoba oil. And because I know that it's very clingy and it's a little bit thick, I'm gonna stand here for a moment to make sure I've got as much dripped out of my little container as possible. If after this craft program you do not have a use for these, you can bring them back to the library. I would recommend tossing them in a little baggie and then bringing them to the desk, the checkout desk or the adult information desk. The adult information desk would be more efficient for them to get them to me. But if you did that, that would be awesome, because we will make use of them again. But if not, keep them at home, figure out a use for them. They're really cool little bottles. So I'm gonna grab my stick again and make sure I get a good stir. So the oil didn't really need to be dissolved in or anything, but I'm just gonna make sure. Just looking at the base a little bit. And I'm going to turn down my stove, because now we are going to be working on the next step. So if you haven't done this already, make sure your iron is now plugged in, and you're going to want your iron close to your workstation. So make sure that it is not too far away. And the reason is that what we're going to do is we're going to take our parchment paper and we're going to lay it flat. And I have 2 layers. So I have it folded in half, and it needs to be large enough for your fabric to fit into. and then you will need to be able to hold it closed. And the reason that you're going to do this is we're going to have this to help contain our mess. As you can see, I also laid down a towel underneath to kind of protect my counter space. And it's just an old towel that I don't really care about that much. And we're going to have this sitting here, our mixture close by, our paintbrush, and we're going to apply the mixture directly onto here, brushing it kind of outward as we can and getting a good soak, but it doesn't need to be perfect, because then we will lay this flat so that it's completely covered with the paper, and we will use our iron on top of this on a low, medium to low heat to help make sure that that mixture has melted and I'm thinking dissolved. That's not the right word, but it has completely been pulled into the whole thing and saturated. That's the word I wanted. We want to make sure that our piece of fabric is completely saturated on the front and the back with this, and using the iron is going to really help make sure that it saturates all the way through. So now that I've explained what we're doing, I'm going to go ahead and do that project, part of the project. And you're going to want to work relatively fast, because when you pull out your brush from the mixture, it does cool pretty fast. I'm going to leave my brush directly in my mixture in between, because I don't want the brush to start solidifying before I am done working with it. And take my iron and just move relatively slowly and steadily. And again, I'm kind of working from the inside out, as I'm making sure that that wax is going all the way through. And you can see it, while it was kind of drying on me and it wasn't soaking in really well, this is really helping to make sure that it is soaking in. And instead of going that way, I'm just going to go like this. And I think that one may have gotten all the way through pretty well, but we're going to open it up carefully because it is still warm. And I don't see any spots that I missed. I'm going to, I think right in here, it's a little bit dry. And I'm going to really quick touch up right in this area with my iron just to make sure it has gone all the way through. Now I just have the one that I was working on today with this project, so I am not going to worry about doing another one. But when you do this, you might notice that there is a little bit of the wax on the outside. That's perfect. When you put your next sheet down, you can use this wax paper or this parchment paper right away, because that wax will be extra wax that can be used for your other fabric you're working with. You don't have too much waste. But then you just peel it off. And I have another towel rag that I'm just going to lay this down on. Just like that. And then this just needs to dry, and then you will have a piece of beeswax wrap that you can use on any of your containers. You could use it to store fabrics. You can create a little pocket to put foods into. all kinds of fun things. As I mentioned earlier, once these are done, they can be composted. You can also refresh them. They last about 6-ish months, sometimes longer, sometimes less. You can touch them up again and then throw them out later down the road, whatever works best for you. I recommend just kind of working with it and figuring out what works best for you. And that is it. We hope that you enjoyed this tutorial. If you have any additional questions, you can ask them down below, or you can email bpearson@marshfieldlibrary.org, and we will answer your questions as soon as we can. Thank you.